Danjo Danahechone. Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to another episode of Apache Stealth. Tonight's story, as part of Nde Clans, Cochise, Part 1. Cochise, as one of the most powerful Chiricahua chiefs, was well known in the southern Arizona region. He prospered and lived by war, surrendered to keep the Chiricahua alive, and died when he thought it was peace. Cochise was a fine speaker, able to rally the men. His mind was incredibly sharp and knowledgeable. This impressed both the native and non-native people. His natural abilities were sharpened and allowed him to speak in front of governors and generals with ease. Men who met him in war saw him lead his warriors into battle, unlike their generals. In peacetime, they found him in peaceful dignity, standing taller than most Apache could grow. Silence was something Apache learned to do since their childhood. Speaking was sacred, and they only spoke when they had something to say. Most natives and non-natives of that time stood an average of 5 foot to maybe 5'6". Cochise stood at 5'10" or maybe a bit higher, which was impressive for an Apache. His physique was thin, tall, and well muscular. Even though the Apache people remembered his stories well, many Magani today only know of the romanticized version of him because of Hollywood. At no time in history did the Apache ever attack a circled wagon train. An Apache life was way too valuable to be thrown away so easily. Nor were they recklessly brave. Here is where the Apache differed from the Plains Indians, who showed their courage by counting coup. This is where they would ride up to their enemy and hit them with a coup stick. When it came to the U.S. soldiers, though, when they saw an Indian riding towards them, it was easier to shoot him off the horse. What Apache highly admired was the use of stealth. Their ability to get rid of their enemy as quickly as possible without risk to themselves made Apache stealth unique in their warfare. Sometimes hard battles were fought when necessary, but they were battles that had little loss to the Apache. All battles were highly planned, unless they were battles of revenge. When the enemy attacked the Apache camps while the warriors were away, killing the elderly, women, and children, of course battles of revenge would happen. General George Crook spoke out many times about his battles with the Apache. He said, "The hostiles were rarely seen. All you saw was puffs of smoke from the rocks. You rarely saw the enemy." This was exactly the case in many of Cochise's battles with the U.S. soldiers. His survival skills were legendary. The Apache were able to connect to their power, this spiritual side that helped guide them, especially in battle. It was well known that Geronimo's power had spoken to him and said no bullet could kill him. That didn't mean he didn't get shot. He took a few bullets in battle. But Geronimo died an old man in his bed, just like his power had told him. This gave Geronimo great strength in battle. His warriors knew he was protected, and the enemy feared they couldn't kill him with a gun. What many didn't know, Cochise also had this power. He never spoke of it to anyone but his sister. It also gave him great strength in battle. If you were to read all the archives from the military at that time, you will see that Makani didn't understand what this power was. They all just claimed that Cochise was just damn lucky. Growing up here in Arizona, one thing became very clear. The Apache were still hated to this day. I had learned that many of the Makani still living in Arizona had relatives that had died from an Apache bullet or arrow. Arizona was the last stand of the indigenous people of North America. The final surrender of Geronimo in September of 1886 became the last day of the free Indians in their land, the last of the free Apache. There is a difference between the legend and the myth. I hope to give you a better idea of the true Apache warriors and the chief named Cochise. Among the allies of Cochise stood other great men of the Apache nation. Cochise was the lieutenant of Chief Mangus Coloradus. It was Mangus Coloradus's political ability that allied all the clans together and formed the Chiricahua Nation. In the beginning, only the Chokonen clan were called Chiricahua. The name came from the mountain where they were from. It was called Mountain of the Wild Turkeys. Mangus Coloradus was also Cochise's father-in-law. Mangus Coloradus led the Cheyenne for 20 years until he was executed by the U.S. soldiers in 1863. Cochise was lucky to have escaped this trap and became the chief of the Chokonen Chiricahua after that. This began one of the bloodiest Apache wars against the United States for a decade. Cochise wasn't as known as Chief Victorio in guerrilla warfare. Victorio's skills in battle, along with his sister Lozin, became legend to the U.S. military. The fighting style of Victorio and his warriors is still being taught by the United States military to this day. Cochise's fame wasn't because of Victorio's lieutenant Nana, whose lightning-fast raids in battle are also taught in the military. Get in, get what you came for, and get out, hopefully without firing a bullet. Cochise didn't have the mind for military tactics like Chief Wa, but they were all his allies at one time or another. Apart, they were fingers of the Apache Nation. Together, they became the Chiricahua Fist Nation. They all willingly fought under the leadership of Cochise or by his side. U.S. and Mexican soldiers tried to exploit the fact that the Apache leaders fought next to their men in battle, but the Apache skills often led those soldiers into doing something that got them killed. All of these leaders respected Cochise for his great counsel, his inspiring words, and his bravery in battle. To Chiricahua Apache, there is nothing more honorable than battle, except bravery. From 1863 until 1874, when the military was taking pictures of the Chiricahua leaders, there had only been one picture ever taken of Cochise. To this day, that picture has never been recovered. Cochise had two sons. His eldest, named Taza, was raised to be a good chief of his people if anything had happened to Cochise. The youngest son was called Naiche. In 1874, after the death of Cochise, Taza became the chief until his death 2 years later. We will talk more about that as this story develops. In 1876, Naiche became the next chief. Not being bred for it, his leadership skills were weaker than his brother and father. It would be Geronimo who made sure everyone kept Naiche as their chief. Again, this story will come later. Taza and Naiche were photographed, and the non-natives who met Cochise said his son Naiche resembled him the most. Straight as an arrow, built from the ground up, as perfect as any man could be. James Henry Tevis, 1850. Another said, of manly and martial appearance, not unlike our conception of Roman soldiers. Manuscript of J.B. White, Smithsonian Institute. Also said, his countenance was pleasant, and made me feel how strange it is that such a man could be a notorious robber and cold-blooded murderer. Oliver Otis Howard, from his book, My Life and Experiences Among Our Hostile Indians. Cochise, like other Nde, believed in speaking only the truth. When they gave their word, which they didn't do often, they kept it. The only times that Cochise ever went back on his word was when he was lied to or was treated treacherously. Cochise once told an army officer, "I want the truth told. A man has only one mouth, and if he won't tell the truth, he should be put out of the way." National Archives of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. His meaning here was no man should be capable of telling lies. He should be let go of his position or put to death. All Apache felt the same about lying, and so do I for that matter. Cochise said it best to his only Makani friend, Thomas J. Jeffords, first and only agent of the Chiricahua Reservation in southern Arizona. If a man asks you or I a question we do not wish to answer, we could simply say, "I don't want to talk about that." This is the same teaching that was taught to us growing up. Cochise's demonstration of integrity went even further. When a council was called between Chiricahua and Makani at Cañada Alamosa, Chief Victorio and Chief Loco were asked if they were involved in a raid of cattle in southern New Mexico. They were both ready to not talk at all until Cochise arrived and told them to tell the truth. They weren't like the Makani who spoke with a split tongue. This was a taboo reference to a snake, which I have spoken about in our stories of Nde and Clans, Taboos, Part 1. I believe it was Hollywood who took that saying and turned it into the famous saying by white actors pretending to be Indian. "Ugh, you speak 'em with forked tongue." After spending 10 days in the Apache Campo, an officer wrote, "Not only Cochise, but all his people seemed infused with honesty. In their relations with us, they were thoroughly honest. During the period I spent in their camp, not a single article of ours was stolen or lost." First Lieutenant Joseph A. Sladen. Cochise also showed his mind in 1860, when a young warrior who was being taught by Cochise got into a duel with John Wilson. The young Apache was killed in that duel, and this riled up the warriors. Cochise stepped in to calm the warriors down, saying, "It was a fair fight, and no blame could be attached to anyone." John C. Cremeny. Cochise's words settled everyone. It is said that back in those days, they were an uncivilized time. But people used to believe in their character and their integrity, especially the Native Americans. Today, people don't even know the meaning of the word integrity. Many of the indigenous people have been assimilated so much that, like the Makani, they don't know how to speak the sacred words of truth either. The path of the red road leads to harmony, and that leads to walking in beauty. Your character, integrity, and sacred words are all the biggest part of it. When it came to Cochise's family and extended family group, he was more affectionate to them than most Magani were to theirs. Fred Hughes once reported, Cochise showed nothing of the brutish nature generally attributed to him. Chief Victorio had a close relationship with his sister Lozan, who all the warriors considered her a warrior as well. Cochise had a close relationship with his sister. She wasn't considered a warrior, but everyone understood that Cochise respected her words of advice as he would of any respected man. Their Apache Campo in the Dragoon Mountains was a beautiful and peaceful place. Many of the Makani who were lucky enough to visit the camp were very shocked to see how life among the Apache there could be. In First Lieutenant Joseph A. Sladen's book, Making Peace, he remembered the Apache there were always cheerful, demonstratively happy and talkative, brimful of fun, and joking and ready to laugh heartily over the most trivial matters. They were especially fond of playing practical jokes of a harmless nature upon each other. Sladen then told a story how everyone in the camp always had food. No one in camp ever went hungry. He related a time when a young warrior went out hunting and came back with nothing. Cochise saw this and grabbed his rifle and rode his horse out of camp. He quickly returned with an antelope kill, tied to his horse. It was quartered out and given to the warriors there, including the young warrior. As you have learned in Taboos Part 1, maybe the young warrior was having bad luck due to his wife not being inside her wickiup. Maybe he accidentally saw his mother-in-law. Whatever reason this young warrior had for his unprofitable hunt, Apache made sure to take care of each other. Who knew if the next time in hunting it would be you who had the bad luck? Cochise was always ready to show compassion, as he did for that young warrior who had a bad hunt. Although Cochise didn't display his compassion much to the enemy, as Magani survivors would tell, a story was told to Sladen about a massacre where a very young Magani boy was the only survivor. Knowing that the young boy wouldn't survive the Arizona desert, Geronimo and most of the Apache warriors thought they should kill him too. Cochise rode up and grabbed the boy and put him on his horse. Cochise raised that boy for a short time and then one day gave him his freedom. Amelia Nietzsche, granddaughter of Cochise, interview with Sladen. Anthropologists of that time had stated that no man could possibly have absolute control over their men. Many army officers of that time would agree with that statement. When it came to the Apache leaders like Victorio, Menges Coloradas, Loco, and Cochise, they were able to obtain absolute control. All the warriors loved and admired Cochise, but they also feared him. None of them would ever disobey an order from Cochise. For these warriors, it was much like not following the orders of the President of the United States themselves. Cochise showed many a good character, from compassion and fairness. His bravery in battle spoke 1,000 words. When Cochise became upset, he would work himself up to being very angry. It is said by Sladen that when a raiding party was returning, the leader of the group would always stop off to fill Cochise in on what happened. Even though these leaders didn't need to do that, they were all compelled to report to Cochise. One day, Sladen saw a young warrior who was reporting to Cochise. The young warrior and Cochise were sitting in discussion, and it was clear Cochise was getting upset. His voice became louder and louder until yelling erupted from him. When Cochise leapt to his feet, the young warrior stood also, and Cochise hit the warrior in the face with everything he had. It appeared to Sladen that when the warriors in the camp heard Cochise yelling, they quickly made themselves go someplace else. Even the young children felt fear when walking around the camp and noticed Cochise looking at them. When Chief Asadaklugi, the son of Chief Wa, was young, his father warned him not to stare at the wickiup of Cochise. It would be considered disrespectful. Cochise was a well-respected, loved, and admired chief of his people, and Magani people couldn't understand how that same man could be feared as well. Researching these stories of Cochise brought back fond memories of my growing up at the Valley of the Seven Warriors. I remember what it was like walking around our campo and seeing an elder staring at me, that sudden rush of adrenaline, and the feeling of being somehow in trouble, not knowing if you should stare back or run. I've walked among many different tribes of indigenous people. I've never seen anything like I have when I'm among my people, the Nde. Even amongst the Nde, they all know the Chiricahua are special. I remember when I was young and I thought that all families, including the Magani, were like mine. It didn't take long to figure out they were nothing like mine. We could run great distances, climb the cliffs, scale buildings with just our fingertips. We could hang on to a branch for hours. We could sit in silence for a month. We could go 4 days without water, almost a month without food. I've watched Magani men cry after 1 day of no water and food. I myself had been tested by the spirit world. I went 5 days without water once, and it almost killed me. In speaking with the elemental spirits, I went 24 days without food. Yes, I learned quickly that Magani were not like us. I took having this gift as having great abilities, but Magani saw it differently. To them, they saw us as being nothing more than animals that should be domesticated, tamed, and dominated. The only thing they admired and still try hard to obtain was our power, our abilities with connecting to the spiritual world. As Geronimo once said, some have the power, some are just talk. Second Lieutenant Britton Davis. Now that we've familiarized you with the personality and character of Cochise, it is time you learn about the clans and Nantans. The Eastern Clan was known by both Mexican and American soldiers as the Warm Springs, the Membres, Copper Mines, and the Mogollon Apache. This also included some of the Gila River people to the west. That mountain range was called the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, but some Magani people see it spelled and pronounce it the Mongolian Rim. Some Magani from that area pronounce it either Mugian or Mogian. That is wrong also. Its true Apache pronunciation is Mogoyan. It is one of the sacred mountain ranges where Child of Water killed one of the legendary giants. The Cheyennes territory was from west of the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and they lived in those mountain ranges called Florida, Victoria, Pinos Altos, Mogollon, Membres, Black, Cochise, and Gila Mountains. The Black Mountain is southeast of Mount Graham. The Nantans from 1820 through 1870s were Mano Moca, Fuerte, Cochillo Negro, Itam, Mangas Coloradas, Delgadito, Victorio, Nana, and Loco. As stated earlier, the Cheyennes guerrilla style of warfare was legendary. To be an Apache warrior was one thing, but to be trained as a Cheyenne scout was the ultimate. Not only did they have to be the best of the warriors, their power also had to be strong. A scout had the ability to track animals and people across solid rocks. It is said they could follow the shadows of the animals and people across time. The Cheyenne, or red paint people, who trained the scouts, were allowed to wear the red bandanas. The standard color for Nde warriors was dark blue. If you were a chief, a war chief, medicine person, or healer, your headband was colored black. In the Hollywood movies, they would show the powerful chiefs wearing white bandanas. That is so wrong. It's not even considered a taboo. Wearing a white bandana into battle was like begging the spirit world to take you. As stated before, Nde weren't recklessly brave. They valued their lives and the lives of their brethren warriors. Today, many Nde have forgotten those teachings of the color of their bandanas. Mostly, we just wear a bandana of any color that we were lucky enough to purchase, or one that was gifted to us. The second band, the Southern Clan, was known to the Mexican and American soldiers as the Llaneros, the Carrizaleños, and the Pinery Apache. They were so called because of the area they dwelled in. Their territory was south into Mexico's Sierra Madres, also along the Mexican and U.S. borders of New Mexico and Arizona. They mostly dwelled in the Mexican states of Chihuahua and Sonora. It was the towns of Llanos in Chihuahua and Carrizal in Sonora that these Apache were the most friendly with. This is why they were called the Llaneros by the Mexicans. But they were also known for their fighting skill in battle. For that, they were called the Nde Clan, which meant the enemy people. The Nantans from 1820 through 1870s were Juan Diego Compa, Juan Jose Compa, Coleto Amarillo, Aravizu, Laceres, Galindo, Natiza, and Wa. The Carrizaleños lived near Carrizal. Their leaders from the 1820s through the 1830s were Hasquedaga and Cristobal. In the 1840s, Francisco, Cigarrito, and in 1850, Cojinalin and Felipe. By the 1860s, the Carrizaleños were hit so hard by the Mexican army, they were completely wiped out. The Netanai wore the standard bandana color of dark blue, the scouts red, and the leaders and healers wore black. The third and central band were the original Chiricahua, called the Chaconen clan. When Mangus Coloradus of the Cheyenne clan became chief, Cochise, who had married Mangus Coloradus' daughter, Totese, became his lieutenant. After Mangus Coloradus was murdered by the U.S. soldiers in a trap, Cochise returned with his family to the Chaconen clan and soon became chief. Their territory went south into the Sierra Madres of Mexico and along the U.S. and Mexican borders of New Mexico and Arizona. Their main mountain ranges were the Dragoons and Wild Turkey Mountains, known today as the Chiricahua Mountains. From the 1820s through the 1870s, their leaders were Pesago Cabezon, Reyes, Matias, Tapila, Eregoyen, Miguel Narbona, Caro, Posito Moraga, Esquinalin, and Cochise. The Chaconen clan wore the standard bandana color of dark blue. The scouts wore red bandanas, and the leaders and healers wore black. The fourth and final clan that the Chiricahua recognized was the Badonkahe clan. Later on, when we begin discussing Geronimo and the Geronimo campaign, we will talk more about this clan. Much like the Carrizaleños, the Badonkahe were virtually wiped out also. Just to slightly touch on this band, the Badonkahe clan is where Geronimo came from. Their territory was on the Gila River Canyon, east of Morenci, Arizona, and into New Mexico, where the Gila River forks. It should be noted that when an Apache woman has sisters, their children aren't considered cousins like in the Makani world. They are considered brothers. Geronimo, during the campaign, had 3 of his brothers with him, Fun, Perico, and Loco. This Loco wasn't a chief like Chief Loco of the Cheyenne clan. They just had the same name. Geronimo was the son of Chief Mako. When Geronimo married Alope of the Netanai clan, he went to live with her family. As it was taboo to speak of your loved ones after they have crossed over, not much more was spoken about the old chiefs of the Badonkahe clan after they were wiped out. The Badonkahe clan wore the standard color bandanas as stated with the other clans. An interesting tidbit should be stated here. During the Geronimo campaign, Geronimo and his brothers, Fun, Perico, and Loco, began wearing a white strip of paint across their nose and cheeks. This was to represent that they were the last of the Badonkahe, basically walking dead men. When the 40 warriors with Geronimo saw them wearing the white paint, they also decided to wear it for battle. To the Nde, when we see that white stripe, it reminds us of the final defiance of Geronimo and the 40 warriors to remain free Apache. To the Makani, the name Geronimo became a scream of defiance. To this day, when people jump out of planes, among other things, they scream, "Geronimo!" and many of them don't even know why. This brings us to the end of Cochise Part 1. I hope you found it informative and educational. I hope you look forward to learning more in Part 2. Until then, may all you beautiful people walk in beauty. Uncle Burro wants peaches. Where are the peaches? He's gonna leave me out here in the woods. Subscribe.